Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, after years of marriage, I discovered my wife cheating with her uncle. Despite our celibacy vow, they had been intimate for years. Shocked and heartbroken, I ended the marriage. Her betrayal shattered me. I've struggled to move on, feeling deep resentment towards her. Now let's get into the story. My wife and I had been married for several years before I caught her red-handed, cheating on me. Evelyn and I were actually fellowship members, and she was gorgeous. Most times I would go to church on Sunday just to see her. However, we were not close friends until I discovered my aunt moved into her neighborhood. 3 houses after my aunt's house, to be precise. As of that time, we were just teenagers, and we weren't close friends like I said earlier because I wasn't exactly the kind of guy she would love to associate with. About 4 years later, my aunt died from cancer, and I stopped visiting the neighborhood and everyone moved on with their lives. But I changed. Something happened to me that I can't share here, and it pushed me to take a different direction in life. I became more serious about my dreams, education, career, and spiritual life. Before this time, I was just a wild young man doing things my peer group did without thinking of the consequences of the future. Luckily, I went to college, graduated, and found a job. Then one day, I bumped into Evelyn on my way back from work. It was a pleasant surprise, and we exchanged contacts. When we were free some days later, we hung out to talk about what had happened in our lives in the past years, and mainly what had happened with me. After our first meeting, we had other hangouts together, and slowly the love I had for her rekindled. And when I felt the time was right, I asked her out and she said yes. We dated for 2 years, and Evelyn and I never got intimate in the whole 2 years. I was a changed guy, and didn't want her to think I was with her because of her body. Aside from that, my spirituality with God grew, and I didn't want to jeopardize that too. So Evelyn and I promised to be celibate until marriage. Eventually, we got married and got intimate on the first night of our wedding, but somehow, I felt like Evelyn was not enjoying my husband's duties, no matter how much I did. She did not say a word to boost my ego or anything. She just stayed there like she was waiting for me to get over and done with, which continued for almost 3 years. We wanted to have kids early because I didn't want to have a 15-year-old son at 50. But no matter how much we tried, she couldn't conceive, which worried us. Meanwhile, there was this uncle of Evelyn whom she was so fond of, her mother's younger brother. I had seen her around him several times as a teenager, so I believed he was her favorite uncle. This uncle of hers, Jesse, used to visit us a lot after we got married, and I didn't have an issue with that because both of our families were welcome to the house. They didn't need permission before coming, because Evelyn was always at home. Evelyn's father was not in her life, and I had the first-hand experience of growing up without a father or an uncle I could look up to. So I didn't want to ruin their moments. So, most times, I would go shopping for Jesse to show him that I appreciated how he looked after my wife and raised her to be the God-fearing woman she was, or so I thought. Also on some nights, Jesse was allowed to sleep over at our place if he stayed so late, and I never said no, because I began to see him as my father. All along, I never noticed anything unusual between the both of them. I knew they were close, and almost every weekend, Evelyn would invite her uncle, Jesse, to come over. The only thing I complained about was how she told him about everything that was happening in our lives. There was even a time when Evelyn and I had a terrible fight, and she called Jesse to come and pick her up and ended up spending the night there. After that was settled, we had no issue that would require her to leave the house anymore. Also, if I felt like Jesse was visiting too much and I'd barely had time to spend with Evelyn, I would suggest taking her somewhere, but she would end up inviting Jesse alone, so I stopped doing that. Throughout these 2 years, nothing suspicious happened until one fateful Friday. That Friday, I was about to return from work when I found out that my 15-year-old car had broken down, and I had to call my usual car company to take it and fix it, so I took a taxi home. Our third anniversary was around the corner, and I had already made plans to take Evelyn's car to the next stop. Evelyn on vacation. It was meant to be our first, but I decided I could get her flowers in advance. So to do that, I asked the taxi driver to drop me at a flower shop a street away from where we lived, and I got the flowers and walked back home. As I climbed my front porch, I heard strange sounds coming from my living room, and I was shocked. At first, I believed Evelyn was watching adult movies, but it didn't sit well with me because it was unlike her, and the sounds I heard sounded more natural. Finally, when I could not control my thoughts anymore, I pushed the door with force, and when it opened, my eyes saw the unbelievable. I didn't even know when the flowers fell out of my hands. When they saw me, they jumped up immediately and scrambled for their clothes. I screamed so loud, and tears dropped uncontrollably from my eyes. That was the worst kind of heartbreak and betrayal I had ever gotten. I would never believe that Jesse and Evelyn could be a thing. And at that point, their closeness began to make sense to me. I understood why he was always around her and at my house, and why she couldn't go a single day without calling him. It wasn't because he was like a father figure to her, but because they were cheating on me. Evelyn began to cry and started to beg me, but I was so disgusted, and I didn't even want to look her in the eye. Evelyn eventually left with her uncle, and they were so embarrassed at how the neighbors gathered to look at them. After she left, she tried to call me multiple times, but I blocked her, and she didn't return to the house because of the embarrassment. Later, I discovered that she had been having an affair with Jesse since she was young, even while we promised to save ourselves for each other. Also, the whole time Jesse visited my home like it was his, they were cheating on me, and I even bought him gifts to appreciate him, and I treated him with so much love. Around the same time I resigned from my job, I contacted a lawyer who helped process the divorce papers. In the end, we divorced and went our separate ways. The wound I got from that heartbreak has not healed since then. Today would have been our 4th anniversary, and I think it's better to share this here to lessen the burden I've carried for so long. I hate her so much for doing this to me. It would have been way better if she hadn't come into my life to hurt me like this, and I hope she gets her karma. As for her family, I don't know what happened when her family found out, and I don't care, but I hope everyone sees her as a monster. Today's second story. In this story, a devout couple, married young due to religious upbringing, faced turmoil when the husband suspected his wife's infidelity with their pastor. Despite suspicions, confrontation led to denial until caught in the act. Devastated, the husband left, initiating a messy divorce. Both cheaters faced community backlash, and their lives shattered. Despite attempts at reconciliation, the betrayed husband chose to sever ties, finding solace in closure. Now let's get into the story. At the time of this story, my wife was 27 and I was 35. We were married by our very own church pastor 6 years prior. Our parents raised us pretty religiously, hence why we married so young. We waited to have intimate until our wedding night. My wife was always involved with the church, so a lot of our bonding happened there. I would help her set up activities for the youth group, clean up the building, or do errands. Even though we were so young, we were committed for life. Our marriage made our parents happy, so we had their support. We were both each other's first and only lovers, so I thought our relationship was going great. I didn't have anything to compare it to. I asked her more often than not if I was living up to her expectations and if she was happy. She always said yes to both. One day, I saw her phone over her shoulder, and she dropped it in a panic, breaking the screen. She blamed me for scaring her, but I think she was relieved I couldn't check her phone. I really thought I saw a chat I wasn't meant to see. I asked her what she was looking at, and she asked why that mattered. I knew she was stalling, so I asked again, and she just said she was texting a girl at church. After my wife's phone screen broke, she started going to church even more. I didn't always go with her, because it was too much. Her phone was replaced, and the thought crossed my mind that she might have been messaging or seeing someone any chance she got, even if she was just in another room from me. At least the pastor was always in the church at the same time as her. He lived on the 2nd floor with his wife. I knew he'd tell me if my wife was up to no good. After we got home from church on Sunday, my wife changed immediately. I went into the bathroom after her and just happened to see what she took off and threw on top of the dirty hamper. Just say I could tell they were marked in a way that didn't come from my wife directly. I checked her worn dress too and found the same stains inside it. I confronted her about it, but she was just offended and wondered what exactly I thought she did. I couldn't bring myself to suggest out loud that she slept with someone at church. Even though she did leave me waiting in the car for her for over an hour, she claimed it was because she was catching up with Nancy, this old woman that didn't go to church that often. She continued going to church every Wednesday night and cleaning or taking care of things nearly every other day. I finally had enough, so I told her I wanted her to stay home. She refused. I didn't know how to handle this because she was her own person and she was doing a good deed. I couldn't force her to stay home, so I was just upset and couldn't do anything about it. Everything changed when the pastor's wife called me one day. She was upset and told me she just found a receipt with my wife's name on it in the pocket of her husband's pants. Apparently, she treated him to a night out when they were supposed to be at the church. I felt panic as she freaked out and concluded they must be seeing each other behind our backs. She hoped they didn't have intimate. I couldn't bring myself to tell her about my wife's suspicious undies and dress. We decided to let them go to Bible study that Wednesday so we could follow them. It was hard not to treat my wife differently. I looked at her with suspicion whenever she was on her phone. How could she act like everything was fine? I could feel the tension in the room, and it was all I could do not to burst. She didn't even notice. She didn't seem to care. After she took a huge bite at dinner, I asked to see her phone. She started coughing violently and took her phone off the table. After she recovered, she asked why. I said I just wanted to check it because there shouldn't be anything for her to hide. She told me it was dead and showed me the black screen. I said after it charged, she should let me unlock it. She was white as a ghost. What are the chances that as soon as she stood up from the table, her phone dropped on the floor and the screen shattered? That's exactly what happened. I just knew at this point that she did it on purpose. It got her out of trouble before, so it was the perfect plan now. I did my best to keep my cool until Wednesday night, when I met the pastor's wife at the church. It was getting late, and Bible study should have been over by now. We snuck into the church and found that room empty. We went down the hall, and the pastor's wife unlocked his office door with the spare key. There in front of us laid the pastor and my wife, on a blanket spread on the floor of his office, with no clothes on. I started snapping pictures on my phone while the pastor's wife ran down the hall screaming for the Lord to help her. She immediately called the prayer team and told them everything, begging them to come support her emotionally. My wife didn't have words for me. All she could say was how sorry she was. She asked me if we could go home to talk. I wasn't looking at her kindly. I felt like she was the worst person in the world. I told her she just broke me. She was holding my heart in her hands, and she crushed it. She was crying and seemed remorseful, but when I kept telling her how terrible she was, she got impatient and demanded to know if I was going to forgive her. I cursed at her and left the church. I still haven't gone back to this day and went to stay with my parents for about a year until our divorce was final. Word of the cheating pastor spread like wildfire until the whole town knew what they did. I'd say the consequences were equally bad for them. My wife was nicknamed Bathsheba, known as the homewrecker of the town, and the pastor was obviously disqualified to be a pastor anymore. Their lives were never the same, and they were far too embarrassed to continue seeing each other. They each moved back in with their parents. My wife only continued working at her job for a few more weeks until showing her face in public was too much for her to handle. After I moved back into the house, she started leaving me letters and voicemails. The only part one read was the first letter, where she said her parents kicked her out. I just tore up the rest and deleted every single voicemail. I didn't want her in my life after what she did to me, and I was glad she couldn't go about her life without a clear conscience.